Hey guys, this is Milton_Fanfiction and this is what if Naruto unleashes sagemode in Chunin exams part 4. Before we start, please do consider subscribing to this channel and turn that bell notification for new uploads. Give this video a thumbs up and comment down below for any suggestions. Also thanks guys for 15 subscribers, I really do appreciate it. Anyways, let's begin.
Chapter 4. Mommy, I'm scared. A little girl quietly told her mother. The mother gripped her daughter and held on, her shoulders shaking and tears running down her face. Shish, it's all right, Mommy won't let anything happen to you. I promise you, so don't worry, okay? The mother said, though her voice was calm, her shaking shoulders and quiet sobs were telling the child otherwise. But, the child, being the innocent little girl she was, nodded her head and quietly said yes. Thank you. Now, I want you to close your eyes and don't open them until I say so, okay? The mother said through bated breath. Her child nodded again, following her mother's instructions. Good little one. Don't worry, okay? Daddy'll be waiting for us. The mother's voice was strained, as if she had given up and was accepting what would happen. The mother closed her eyes as well, and then hugged her child tightly, as if the world was going to take her away. And then, a loud crash, the sound of shattering glass, wood being broken down, sand gushing in, and a blast of wind swept past them both, and suddenly, the world stilled. They felt no pain. XXX. Damn it. The Shukaku is running around like a loose 50 feet tall chicken. Jiraiya shouted in alarm as it destroyed another building. A civilian building. He only hoped that the civilians evacuated and went to the war shelters. The last thing he needed was causalities. He carefully jumped on top of another building and started furiously stroking black ink on sealing paper. Though he was in a hurry, his calligraphy was still amazingly well done. And he needed it to be well done, lest he unknowingly give the Shukaku a power boost. Jiraiya-chan, we can't keep steering him away from the buildings. We need to get it to an open area. We can't fight here. Jiraiya growled and turned around and shouted his response. I know, Pa, but right now we got no choice. I can't just lift that thing up and chuck it across the village. Jiraiya shouted as he turned back to his writing, stroking the brush even faster. Pa dodged another swipe of the Shukaku's tail as he used a silent water jutsu to bombard it and make it heavier. Now Ma, Fukasaku shouted as he watched Ma appear in front of him and then use her tongue to wrap around the thick tail, before she squeezed hard and split the tail in two. The tail fell on the streets and didn't bother to reform, as it was too heavy to really be useful. Good work, Ma, Fukasaku praised as he landed on another building with Shima beside him. Shima turned to Fukasaku, let out an exhausted sigh. This thing ain't no Kyuubi, but it doesn't let up on the attackin'. Pa, why don't ya just grab it and throw it out of the village? Shima asked, her voice laced with weariness. Fukasaku only sighed and shook his head. Believe me, Ma, I would try it. But the sand and this webbed feet of mine just don't mix. I won't be able to get a good grip on it. Fukasaku explained, gaining a small nod from Shima. But before they could go back on the offensive, Fukasaku stopped Shima. What is it, Pa? We don't have the time to be stoppin'. We need to get this thing under control. Shima said, her voice filled with newfound confusion. Fukasaku shook his head and turned around. Ma, I think we should just sit back and observe. I got a bad feeling. Call it a hunch, but I just felt something explode from the stadium. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it felt the same as the Kyuubis. Fukasaku explained. Shima narrowed her eyes and looked toward the stadium. She had a feeling as to who or what it was. But she didn't know if it was an it, or if it was a him. And that thought scared her, not just for her health, nor for Jiraiya's and Fukasaku's. No, she was scared for the boy. I have a feelin', Pa, she began, garnering Fukasaku's attention as he turned and looked at her, that you'll be meeting Naruto-chan. But, not the one that you'll like. XXX. Ino was in pain. Extreme pain. She tried to move her legs, and thankfully, they were still moving. She tried to move her arms, and they too were moving. She carefully wiggled her body, trying to assess the damage. She let out a sigh of relief as she didn't feel anything broken. She was lucky that the brunt of the damage was blocked by Sakura. Ino cried in horror as she moved under the rubble, trying to look for her friend's face. trying to find any part of her body, wanting to see if she was alright. She wiggled, and tried to push the rubble off of her body, but the rubble was too heavy and she only tired herself out. She cursed and tried wiggling again, but this time, the rubble seemed to move and start to slowly move down. Ino stopped abruptly, cursing as she did. Damn it. I can't move or this rubble'll crush me, she said to herself, her strained and tired. Okay Ino, you'll be fine. Sakura's fine, you're fine. All I have to do right now is control my breathing and hope rescue comes sooner. Breath in, hold, and breath out, hold. She chanted to herself as she followed her own instructions. She carefully breathed in and out as she waited for rescue, but a sudden sound to her right managed to elicit a gasp from the girl. The sound was a pained groan, and she only knew one person who could be right beside her on the other side of the rubble. Sakura, are you there? Sakura, answer me. Ino shouted desperately as she saw a small gap to the side. She heard the groan. Ino. What happened? A weak reply came from the other side of the rubble. Ino cursed at how weak it sounded, but managed to recollect herself as she turned her head some more, trying to see the other side of the gap. But it was useless, as it was too dark to see 2 feet in front of you. We were hit by rubble. Sakura. Naruto transformed again. He exploded with power, and the rubble around him was launched away from him. Ino explained. Sakura, tell me, is anything broken? Are you alright? Ino asks, her voice strained as she asked that question. Ino heard Sakura groan in pain, and her worry skyrocketed. I think I have a few broken ribs. My left arm is broken too, but my legs are fine. Sakura stuttered in pain. Small gasps were heard by Ino from the other side of the gap. And she hated those gasps. Okay Sakura, try to hold out, we'll be rescued eventually. Right now though, try to control your breathing. We don't know how long we'll be under here. So try to conserve as much oxygen as you can, okay? Ino tried to sound reassuring, but her voice was strained and she was having a hard time believing what she had just said. She heard Sakura chuckle through the gap. She turned her head and waited for another sound coming from Sakura. But Sakura didn't say anything else. Instead she tried to breath in and out. Her labored breaths echoed for Ino. And during that time, she hated it. She hated being useless. Hated being useless when her friend was hurt and possibly dying. She hated being under those concrete slabs of rubble. And most of all, she hated Naruto for doing this to her and Sakura. XXX. Hiruzen was many things. Silent, strong, caring, patient, and intelligent. So the moment he saw Naruto began to transform, he immediately called for the boy's restraint and went to get the emergency backup seals in case anything like this would happen. He left the stadium, but not without ordering several Anbu and Chunin to evacuate the civilians and to spread the order around the others. He was thankful for their immediate response as they evacuated the building as he left it. But as he left it, he was suddenly aware that most of the village buildings were rubble, and burning in the background. He cursed colorfully as he took in the sight of his village in chaos. But he had bigger problems than the attack that was happening. He knew about the attack, of course. Jiraiya had warned him about it, and he went over multiple countermeasures to see to it his village wasn't destroyed in the end. What he did not take into account, however, was Naruto summoning Shima and then using Sage Chakra to beat Neji. He did not take account that the Kyuubi wouldn't want the foreign chakra source in its host's body. That the Kyuubi would try to force it out with its own chakra. He didn't take into account that Neji, in a fit of desperation, would suddenly push his chakra through Naruto, trying to remove all the chakra he had, trying to tie the match, to salvage it and win. That was when it all went to hell. Naruto, having held down the Kyuubi's chakra deep into his coils, was engulfed by the Kyuubi's sudden flow of chakra. All his previous chakra was out of his system, which meant that the Kyuubi's chakra was free to take over. That was all he saw, as that was when he was on his way to the cage mansion. While he was inside, however, he was met with the bandaged visage of Danzo, who had been waiting for him apparently. Danzo let out a frustrated sigh as he relayed the information to Hiruzen. How the north and east gate was close to falling. How the west gate had already fallen. And how the Shukaku was busy ripping apart the center of the village. Hiruzen knew what he was going to ask, he just knew it. And he denied him. Damn it, Hiruzen. We're being massacred out there. Allow me to send out my route. If we don't, we may as well surrender. Danzo shouted at the Hokage. They were both walking briskly through the corridors of the Hokage's office complex. And every few steps they took, the ground shook from the explosions and fights happening outside of the complex. Hiruzen quietly growled as he made his way towards the main entrance of the building. He didn't have time for Danzo. He needed to get the seal to Naruto, lest the village really be destroyed. He didn't give any indication if he really was listening to Danzo, he only kept walking straight and towards the exit. Danzo clicked his teeth in frustration. Right now, his village was being ravaged by two enemies, one inside, the other outside. He wanted nothing more than to mobilize his root squad. Secrecy be damned if there was no one to keep the secret from. I don't have time for your second-guessing, Hiruzen. I love this village as much as you do. But without your orders, my route may as well be enemy shinobi the moment they step out of the shadows. I need your express permission to send them out. Danzo reasoned to the still unresponsive cage. He growled as they finally stepped out of the complex, but the moment they did, they had to jump out of the way as a literal river of snakes crashed through the entrance and gave a gaping hole to it. Hiruzen landed to the right of the snake river, and Danzo to the left. They readied themselves for a fight, Danzo disregarding his cane, and Hiruzen removing his robe and hat to reveal black battle armor under it. They heard chuckling as they finally registered who the snakes belonged to. And Danzo swore he heard Hiruzen growl in anger at the sight. Oh, is that any way to greet your old student sensei? I'm hurt. Do you really hate me that much now? The voice was almost snake-like, with the S's lingering in the air as they seemed to come from the hissing voice. Danzo, I approve of your previous request. Have your route mobilized, but before you leave, Hiruzen tossed a scroll over towards Danzo, who deftly caught it. He stared at it and carefully examined it. It was nothing to eye-catching. Save for the letters written on it, they spelled, emergency seal. He noted the singular use of the word seal, and filed it in for later. He turned his head over to Hiruzen, who hadn't taken his eyes off the person that had attacked them. Can you handle him alone, Hiruzen? Danzo asked, his voice sounding with the least amount of concern, but nonetheless. There was still concern for his previous teammate in there. Hiruzen only nodded swiftly, giving Danzo the answer. Danzo returned the nod with his own, before he channeled chakra to his feet and propelled forward, hoping to hop over the wall and towards the village. He saw a sudden flash of purple, however, and stopped on top of the separator wall, and it was a good thing he did. As he finally noticed the purple wall of malicious energy surrounding the entire complex. He clicked his teeth in frustration and turned around, looking at Hiruzen with a frustrated look. Hiruzen, we're trapped. He had a barrier set up. I don't know what kind, but it's fairly potent. I can feel malice oozing out of it. Danzo gave Hiruzen the heads up, which he duly noted. Hiruzen didn't take his eyes off his previous student, however, as he just stared into the cold, unfeeling snake-like eyes of his would-be opponent. His opponent smirked at the careful eye his previous sensei was giving him. Oh my, with those eyes of yours, sensei, I think you're actually thinking of killing me, the man began, chuckling as his voice trailed. And I do hope you're actually planning on doing it. I would hate to fight a frozen senile old man stuck in the past. His voice took a sharp turn, and the air grew cold as he finished his sentence. It was then, however, that a slight gust of wind, and the shuffling of robes made the man look away from Hiruzen, and into the calculating eye of Danzo. He allowed a small smirk as he felt the cold touch of a Tonto pressing into his back. He may have some compassion for you, Orochimaru, Danzo began as he spat the name of the man he held at sword point. But unfortunately for you, I do not share his feeling. He finished as he drove the sword through Orochimaru's spine. The sword pierced the Sannin from the back, and swiftly exited through the man's front stomach. But to the surprise of Danzo, blood didn't erupt from the wound. He looked up, one clearly surprised eye looking into the slit iris of the Sannin, who was smirking at the surprised reaction. In the next number of instances, several actions happened that would have clearly been a blur if they were observed by lower-level ninja. In the first instance, Orochimaru grabbed the blade protruding from his front and yanked it out, Danzo's grip slipping as he did that surprised move. In the next instance, Hiruzen channeled chakra into his feet and erupted from the ground, making it crack and depress as he kicked off the ground. In the third instance, Orochimaru spun around and tried to slice Danzo's head from his shoulders. In the fourth instance, Danzo leaned back. The blade that Orochimaru had snatched from him grazing his bandage over his covered eyes. The blade passed through the bandage mere millimeters from his covered eye. The blade ran through the bandage, and gave it a cut that left the previously covered eye open for the world to see. In the fifth instance, Hiruzen had appeared behind Orochimaru. Hand open and sideways, intent on pushing it through the Sannin's now wounded back. In the sixth and final instance, Hiruzen struck and blood finally erupted from Orochimaru's body. Except, it wasn't his body anymore. Hiruzen had pierced and probably killed an Odogaker genin that had participated in the preliminaries. It was the boy with the urban camouflage scarf and the sound headband, his black hair not really standing out from his clothing. It was the sound genin Zaku. Hiruzen was surprised to see the sound genin suddenly in the place of his former student. But his surprise soon turned into anger as he realized what his student had done. He quickly pulled out his hand, and caught the still boy. He saw that the boy's face was frozen in shock. He was probably alive when he pierced the boy's body. He carefully laid the boy down on the ground, closing the boy's eyes as he did. His stoic face did not show his disappointment at taking a life as young as this. He turned around as he heard Orochimaru chuckling. Danzo had taken to standing on his right side, clutching at his covered eye as he glared daggers at Orochimaru. My oh my, I did not expect that, Danzo Ojasan. Who would have guessed that under all those bandages, you were harboring a Sharingan? Orochimaru said with a smirk at the now scowling Danzo. Of course, Orochimaru knew about the Sharingan, but Hiruzen knew nothing about it, and seeing Danzo squirm was too much fun for the Sannin to pass up. He never saw Danzo lose his cool. He was always the no-nonsense drill sergeant type of guy. But right now, Danzo was close to losing it entirely. He watched with a superior smirk as Hiruzen turned his gaze over towards Danzo, who was growling at Orochimaru's smirk. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, and returned his gaze to Orochimaru. We'll discuss this later, Danzo. Right now, we have bigger problems. Hiruzen stated as he started to form hand seals. As he finished his seals, he promptly slammed his hand on the ground. Intricate seals spread forth from the ground, and a puff of smoke erupted from the center. As the smoke cleared, the previously empty space was now occupied by a tall white monkey. The monkey was wearing a white vest with a pair of black pants. And it was curious to note that the monkey had a Konohagakure headband on its forehead. The monkey stood in the middle of the seals that had appeared previously. The monkey eyed his surroundings carefully, before finally turning around and looking at the aged Hokage in the eyes. Hiruzen, I take it we'll actually be fighting this time. No talk over tea. The monkey asked with a small smirk. Hiruzen let out a dry chuckle as he answered. I'm afraid not, Enma. I need your strength to finish what I should have done a long time ago. The monkey, Enma, nodded his head before forming the tiger hand seal and erupting in smoke. Hiruzen quickly reached inside the cloud, and pulled out a thick black staff with gold rims. Hiruzen started twirling the staff as he tested the weight of the staff. Satisfied with that weight, he stopped the spinning and settled on holding the staff on his side while upright and facing his opponent. Danzo, meanwhile, was busy removing the bandages from around his eye and arms. He needed to get out of that cage, and knowing Orochimaru, he needed everything he could throw. Orochimaru was a slippery bastard, and without the proper mindset, he'd kill you while you were busy forming up a plan. Orochimaru smiled as he looked at his opponents. His smile turned into a laughing fit as he saw his opponents in all their glory. Danzo bandage less, pale arm exposed with 10 Sharingan eyes spinning. And Hiruzen, black armor and staff by his side. He let his laughing die down, however, as he glared at his opponents. It seems you do not have time to play games. Well, neither do I. Thankfully, I'm not alone. Orochimaru said cryptically as he started forming hand seals. But before he could finish what he intended to do, Danzo was behind him, arm arched back ready to strike. And he did. Orochimaru's back arched into a curve as the force from Danzo's punch was enough to send him airborne and into the divider wall. The wall crumbled into him, but he managed to jump out of it in time so it wouldn't crush him. But as he was airborne, he felt someone behind him. He turned, and was met face to face with Hiruzen's staff. The staff hit him on top of his head, and pushed him towards the ground. The staff pushed against Orochimaru's head and towards the ground. As Orochimaru's face met the ground, he suddenly erupted into smoke. And the previous form of Orochimaru was now the form of a piece of wall rubble where he crashed earlier. Hiruzen cursed as he jumped back and settled into a defensive position. He closed his eyes and listened for anything that would alert him of Orochimaru's position. He let his heartbeat slow, as he waited, and waited, and waited. And then he heard it, the whizzing. It meant that something was coming at him, something that was cutting the air. He leaned his head to the left and managed to avoid getting his face impaled by a sword. He turned around, and was met with the form of Orochimaru holding an intricate Chinese sword with snake designs on its handle. Kukuku, as expected from my sensei and his previous rival. It's good to see that old age hasn't let your skills drop one bit. Orochimaru complimented his opponents as he laughed. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, and then jumped towards Orochimaru's laughing form. He struck with his staff's edge as he thrust it forward. Orochimaru stopped laughing just in time to deftly parry it to his side. But he couldn't parry the next strike suddenly hitting his face. Hiruzen had used the other end of his staff and twisted it so as it moved forward, the back side would move forward with the front side as well. The now sideward staff hit Orochimaru's face, and Hiruzen used the momentum and spun around towards Orochimaru's backside. As Hiruzen spun, he used his staff to hit Orochimaru one more time from his back, which elicited a pained gasp as the air escaped from Orochimaru's lungs. Hiruzen used more force to push back Orochimaru, and held the end of his staff like a baseball bat. Before finally, Orochimaru's momentum gave in. He was launched into another part of the wall divider, and rubble landed on top of him. Hiruzen let out a sigh as he readied back into his fighting position. Danzo too had readied himself as he stood side by side with Hiruzen. You're still good, I admit. Even if your methods of leading the village make us look weak. Danzo praised in his own way. With which Hiruzen only smirked. I could say the same to you. Though that arm of yours probably did all the work for you. Hiruzen said, eliciting a small smirk from Danzo. The rubble started shifting, and pretty soon, Orochimaru resurfaced, his clothes slightly tattered and dirty at being crushed by rubble. Kukuku, no wonder you two are the strongest shinobi of your time. That would have killed any normal person. And your mastery of analyzing the situation, sensei, will be irksome. Orochimaru laughed as he readied back into position, his sword still gripped in his left hand. They each stared into their opponent, each trying to see who would move first. The silence was palpable, almost to the point of choking. Finally, after a few more seconds of stillness, Orochimaru launched himself, leaving an indent in the dirt as it pushed back into a mound. Danzo couldn't react in time as he was impaled by Orochimaru's sword. The sword having been impaled through his heart. He choked as Orochimaru twisted his sword, his twisted smile shook Danzo's soul. But, his smile soon faded into a frown as Danzo suddenly started slowly dissipating. And before Danzo's body fully dissipated, he was hit with Hiruzen's staff, which went through the now gone body. Orochimaru twisted his body to avoid the staff hitting his face again, but he was met with Danzo's enclosed fist. He closed his eyes as he was hit and launched into the Hokage's building, slightly shaking it and destroying a part of its wall. Hiruzen didn't react at seeing Danzo again, he only nodded his acknowledgement as he readied himself for Orochimaru's counterattack. Likewise, Danzo didn't say anything as he readied himself. Orochimaru's form was seen exiting the building, his hand on the damaged wall to support his body. Orochimaru was no longer smirking, and he now had a grim face on. That was dirty Danzo. Using a Zanagi to escape death. You only have a limited number of Sharingans. And you would use one just to live. I am deeply disappointed in you. Orochimaru chided, hoping to get a reaction from Danzo. But Danzo didn't bite as he just stared at Orochimaru. Orochimaru clicked his teeth in frustration at the lack of reaction. I will not be treated as an obstacle. Ninpu. Kakushi Kemari. Ninja art. Concealing smoke. Orochimaru shouted as his stomach suddenly inflated. And then he exhaled. Black smoke erupted from his mouth and covered the battlefield. Danzo and Hiruzen jumped away from the advancing smoke and landed on the divider wall, where they had covered their noses and mouths with their hands. After all, it may sound like a harmless gas cloud jutsu, but a person can lace his body with poison so that anything he expels from his body may be poisoned as well. Hiruzen turned to Danzo, and quietly spoke. Danzo, this smoke is likely used to buy the user time. Try to blow it away. Knowing Orochimaru, he has more than one trick under his belt. Hiruzen told Danzo. Fueton. 10 Kara Orite Fukukas. Wind release. Wind blowing down from the heavens. Was Danzo's immediate response. Almost immediately after Danzo uttered his technique. A strong gust of wind blew past Hiruzen and Danzo, blowing away the black smoke and revealing Orochimaru, who was standing beside two men clad in red and blue armor. Hiruzen and Danzo couldn't believe their eyes as they registered who the people standing beside Orochimaru were. "And no," was all Hiruzen could say. "XXX. Hey, aren't you the Anbu lady that called me?" Jiraiya asked but didn't look up as he just continued jotting down on the ceiling paper. Neku, who had just arrived in front of Jiraiya, nodded her head. "You're lucky I can see you, or else I would need to look at you and take my eyes off this seal. Anyway, right now, the Shukaku is quarantined in this area. My 2 summons are busy trying to make it stay here. But I don't know how long they'll last. You think you can provide backup for them long enough for me to finish this seal?" Jiraiya asks, and this time, Neku did respond verbally. "Hi, I will try my best in Tenzo's place," Neku said as she jumped and went over towards the Shukaku's rampaging form. Neku twisted her body as she dodged a stray piece of building rubble that shot past her body. She landed gracefully on top of a building and carefully assessed the situation. Currently, the small male toad was busy trying to get the Shukaku's attention at the front, while the female toad was trying to steer the giant raccoon's attacks from hitting anything remotely showing life. Note the key word, tried. The giant raccoon refused to bend any which way, swiping its huge tail and toppling building after building. The screams of a few civilians died as each building toppled. Neku cursed as she heard the distinct sound of silence. Save for the toppling buildings, no voices were heard. And that meant one of 2 things. 1. The civilians had all evacuated, or 2. The civilians died by the falling buildings. And from the screams earlier, Neku knew the latter was true. She jumped high into the air and readied her short sword, deflecting multiple rubble pieces from hitting her main body. She jumped from building to building, dodging, blocking, and evading each piece of rubble as she got closer to the giant raccoon. Finally, after dodging one last piece of rubble, she was right behind the giant raccoon. She ran full speed towards the front of the beast, carefully taking in every last feature of the sand monster. From the intricate tattoos on its sand body, to the black eyes of a monster. "Come on, give me something here, a weak spot, an exposed part, a hollow part. Anything," she screamed in her mind as she took in the giant tanuki. Finally, after a quick glance up towards the forehead, she stopped dead in her tracks. There was the spot she was looking for. On the forehead of the giant raccoon was a small speck. But on closer inspection, the speck was in fact the previous human body of the raccoon monster. The body halfway buried into the sand, and leaning forward as if he was dead. But her trained eyes noted the closed eyes and slight breathing by the nostrils. She was called Cat, for a reason. She had eyes like one. "There!" she shouted as she channeled chakra into her feet and launched up from the ground and straight towards the monster's forehead. Sword poised and ready to strike. She was close, almost there. 25 feet, 0.15. Almost, she thought as she approached the body. She drew her sword back, and readied her strike. But she made the mistake of looking towards the monster's eyes. She glanced downwards, only to be met by the monster's furious irises. She swore the world was going in slow motion as terror spread across her body at the sight. She saw the irises dilate and, in a sudden instance, her body was set ablaze with pain. The giant raccoon had raised its hand and promptly swat her away, as if she was a fly. She was hit with bone-shattering force as she sailed through the air and over buildings. It amazed her that she was still conscious. She let out a muffled scream. Muffled because her broken ribs had pierced her lungs, making her breathing labored and irregular as she sailed through the air. She looked up, towards the rapidly approaching building, and shut her eyes. She wasn't going to survive this impact. She survived the small swat, but crashing in a building made of cement. Her chances were horrible. But, as sudden as the swat came. She was suddenly grabbed from the air by an unknown source. She felt her body suddenly burn from the sudden grab, as if her chakra was being burned away. And then she remembered the laws of physics. Her abrupt stop pushed blood towards her head, the G-forces having been cancelled by the sudden stop. And then she promptly fainted. But not without catching a flash of her savior, a flash of blood red. XXX. Damn it. Jiraiya cursed as he saw the female Anbu member swatted away like a fly. He didn't look over to where she was going, and only hoped that she would survive. Right now though, he was close to completing the seal. It was a rather generic seal that he had made, but nonetheless effective if used right. He jumped into the air and towards the giant raccoon. Feeling two familiar weights land on his shoulder, he let out a dry chuckle. So, I take it that was a good workout. Jiraiya joked, getting a slight apprehensive snort from his left shoulder. Not the time, Jiraiya, Fukasaku lightly chided. As the seal ready, he axed as he breathed in and out raggedly. Tired from dodging and parrying the giant raccoon's attacks. Jiraiya nodded as he landed on a roof. He turned to his left shoulder, taking in the tired look of Fukasaku, and then he turned to his right, and saw Shima more or less the same way. Take a rest both of you, you've done enough. I can take care of the rest. Jiraiya told them, only to be met with shaking heads. Like it or not, Shima began as she breathed in deep, trying to steady her rapidly beating heart. We're with you all the way. We have our own agenda, but that doesn't mean that we won't help you in full. Don't worry about us, Jiraiya-chan, we've faced worse. Shima finished as she let out a small smirk and looked up at the giant raccoon as it let out another bellowing roar. Jiraiya smiled at this, and readied himself. After taking a brief second to recompose his body, he launched himself at the giant raccoon. He soared through the air, one arm behind with a swirling mass of chakra in his hand. He smirked as the giant raccoon raised a hand to defend itself from any attack. Rasengan. Spiraling sphere. Jiraiya shouted as he thrust his hand with the ball forward. The attack connected with the giant sand arm, and promptly disintegrated it. The arm flew apart in millions of grains of sand. The giant monster let out a sharp cry and grabbed the stump of its broken arm. Jiraiya, however, wasn't finished as he continued on and landed on the giant raccoon's body. He channeled chakra into his feet, but he still slid down a bit. The moving sand and the millions of sand grains didn't exactly make it a single solid surface. But nonetheless, he managed to recompose himself as he readied his body. He ran straight up the giant sand monster. The Shukaku saw him and felt him coming up his body. He let out a low growl as he sent countless tendrils of sand connected to his main body shooting straight for Jiraiya. Jiraiya cursed as he saw countless tendrils coming towards him. He dodged one tendril by jumping up, but he was met with another tendril coming towards him. He twisted his body and managed to let the tendril fly past his side. He grabbed the tendril and used it to pull himself upwards. Dodging another two tendrils that shot past him. He landed on the main body again, and was met with three tendrils coming towards him from all his sides. He clicked his teeth in frustration as he ducked and slid on the sandy surface. The tendrils hit each other and burst into a large cloud of sand. But as the cloud exploded outwards, it abruptly stopped. And then reformed into one massive tendril and flew towards the fleeing Jiraiya. Oh come on. That's not fair. Jiraiya shouted in exasperation as he weaved left and right to dodge the tendrils coming towards him, while trying to shake off the giant tendril coming for him. He suddenly felt his shoulders feel lighter. And as he looked back, he saw both old toads grab the giant tendril with their tongues and held it in place. Oh, Iya Sean. Shima shouted, and Jiraiya nodded as he returned to facing and running up the giant raccoon. He carefully eyed the giant raccoon as he dodged smaller tendrils coming at him to his front. He was looking for a place to place the seal. A weak spot, most probably the kid's body. Most Biju awakenings leave out their jailer's body in hope that they'll die. Since being awakened meant that you had your old body back. If their jailers died, they'd be set free instead of dying in the body of the host. After a few more seconds of careful scrutinizing and dodging of tendrils, he saw it. The weak spot he was looking for. He channeled chakra into his feet and launched straight up, seal flapping in the wind and his arm forward. He was close to the body, just a few more feet in. The next thing he knew, He was swatted away like the Anbu before. He was shocked at how fast that hand was, he hadn't even seen it move. It was almost automatic, like it was built in to react to anyone coming close to the kid's body. He looked left, and then right, and found that both arms were still by the sides, like they hadn't moved at all. He then refocused his eyes forward, and saw that the kid had a wall of sand separating them. With one giant arm where he tried to move towards the body. He growled as he figured out how he was swatted away. It wasn't the main arms that hit him. It was a secondary defense that activated when someone tried to get close to the boy's body. He flipped his body and skid on the giant tanuki's body, crouching and using his hand to stop his sliding. The hit was hard, but he was used to harder. But as he tried to recollect his breath, he sensed danger. He ducked and the previously giant tendril shot past his face and his front body. The tendril grazed him, but left no visible wound. He growled as he shot his hand forward and burst his chakra through the tendril, cutting it in half and destroying it. He straightened himself and observed the giant raccoon just laughed at him. He felt two familiar weights land once again on his shoulder. He sighed as he thought about the automatic defense that activated when he got close to the body. His mind was going in overdrive right now, and he really needed to find a way to get to the main body. Before he could tell Shima and Fukasaku, however, a sudden flash of red shot past his peripheral vision. He looked upwards into the flash of red, and was surprised to see Naruto in his red-cloaked visage standing on the Shukaku's chest and looking at the monster. Naruto had his back turned to Jiraiya, so he didn't see Naruto's face. He was about to call out to the kid, but he saw Naruto suddenly crouch down, and both of his tails moved forward, where he had his hand open in a palm. He paled as he felt wind pick up and come towards Naruto's body, followed by the feeling of dread and power. He felt this kind of power before, and he knew what was going on. The kid wasn't in control, he knew that now. The Kyuubi was in control, and it was so pissed it was going to use a Biju ball. Only one word went through Jiraiya's mind as he finally took in the heaviness of the situation. Fuck.
Chapter 5. The Kyuubi was pissed. It was truly genuinely pissed. First, his host was using natural chakra that made him uncomfortable in the stomach of his. Next, he had only managed to fight to a draw with the Hyuga, despite the power boost he had. Next, he couldn't handle his chakra and went full on berserker mode. Next, the Shukaku Jinchuriki had attacked, and at first they were winning. But cheap shot that flung his container and propelled him towards a building made him growl. Not to mention having him use up even more chakra to save him from those explosive seals. He was going to make that clown and harpy pay for what they did. But right now, he needed to show the Shukaku its place. They weren't done fighting when they were interrupted, and he would be damned if he couldn't finish it now. He had tried to at least summon a small Biju ball, but as it turns out, the kid's body wasn't ready to handle that kind of pressure. The ball he was trying to make had fizzled to dust in a second. The boy's body couldn't handle it, and he was trying his damnedest to get it to work. He wanted nothing more than to put the Shukaku in its place. But with the boy's weak body, he couldn't do anything other than attack with his claws and feet. Hardly fitting for a being of mass destruction. The Kyuubi in Naruto's body dodged another volley of sand balls coming at him at high speeds. He ducked under the volley and slid along the side of the Shukaku's body, over towards the demon's head. And it was there that he spotted something, the weak spot he was told about. Namely the boy who was the Shukaku's Jinchuriki sticking out of the Shukaku's forehead. He would have charged at the boy's body immediately, had it not been for the defense he was told about ahead of time. By the female Anbu the Shukaku swatted away. XXX. Human, wake up. The Kyuubi-fied voice of Naruto Uzumaki shook the fallen form of Neku, who was laid down on the ground on her back. Neku didn't respond to the slight shaking of the Kyuubi, who growled in annoyance at the unresponsive form of Neku. So he quickly kicked her to get her to wake up. He smirked as he heard her groan. He kneeled down to face the woman hidden behind the cracked mask. He knew she was awake now, her breathing was faster and her body was tense. The quirks of having heightened senses. I know you're awake. Don't even try to attack, lest I finish what Shukaku started. He warned her as she seemed to tense even more. The Kyuubi smirked as she relaxed, albeit quietly. Good, now tell me. When you were swatted away from the Shukaku, how strong was it? He asked her. The woman didn't respond immediately, only looking on at the Kyuubi with Naruto's face. The Kyuubi seemed to understand what she was getting at inside. Don't worry about the kid, he's still in here. Just unconscious and sitting pretty in that head of his. I can't take full control, the seal is too strong and I doubt they'll just let me roam free. After what the kid pulled at the exams, I took a chance when that Hyuga pushed all his chakra out of his body. He told her, but she still didn't react. He sighed as he scratched the nape of his neck. Okay, you got me. It was entirely by accident, I didn't intend to make him go berserk. I was only trying to overwrite that natural chakra he was using. Damn thing makes me uncomfortable. He told her, and she still didn't respond. He growled and looked down at her damaged form. Listen, right now I'm the only guy who has a chance in hell of beating the Shukaku, so if you don't want your pretty little village in rubble, I suggest you start talking. He warned her, growling as he finished the sentence. The Anbu member seemed to tense at the growling, before he heard her sigh. Fine, what did you want to know? She managed to speak despite her broken body. The Kyuubi smirked. I just want to know how big it was and how strong it is. I can't count nor can I measure. So having someone explain to me how big that raccoon is a big help to me. A Biju, when taking over its host, doesn't have access to all his powers before he was sealed. There are certain exceptions to this, but most if not all its powers are still sealed. Whatever is sealed depends on the strength of the seal they used. And by the looks of it, the Shukaku's was either half-assed, or better than Min. He can only amplify the host's natural powers. The Shukaku is a being made of sand, and the kid can control sand. Put two and two together, you get something extremely troublesome. He told her, and she weakly managed to nod her head. Good, you understand. Right now, I just want nothing more than to rip the Shukaku to shreds and that host of his. Not to mention the clown and the wind harpy. But the Shukaku comes first. So, I'll ask again, how strong is it? XXX. Needless to say, that little interrogation had given him insight on what was happening now. Namely the Shukaku rampaging and the weak spot on the head and its abnormally fast arm defense. Physically, the Shukaku was tough and fast. But it was mentally unstable right now, what with the constant laughing and hysterical chuckling. The Kyuubi growled as he had to dodge another tendril that shot towards him. It was getting annoying dodging each tendril, and it needed to stop. He swerved as he ran forward full speed, a tendril shooting past his body. As the tendril flew backwards past the Kyuubi, he jumped on the tendril and began running along its mass. And regardless of the speed of the tendril going in the opposite direction, the Kyuubi was running along it. The Shukaku seemed to bristle at this and shot more all its tendrils towards the incoming Kyuubi. The Kyuubi, however, seemed to be expecting that and had now jumped high into the air and twisted his body. Several tendrils shot past him. In between his arms, his legs, and just under his chin. The airborne Kyuubi smirked as he crossed his hands together and formed a familiar handseal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Shadow Clone Jutsu. The Kyuubi shouted. But, instead of the regular Naruto way of summoning over 100 clones, he had instead summoned one singular clone over the original body surrounded with the tendrils of sand. The Kyuubi then twisted his hands into another handseal, this one, into hair. Suddenly, a poof of smoke erupted from where the Kyuubi was stuck, and the clone. As the smoke cleared, it revealed nothing different, the clone was still above the tendrils and slowly falling towards them. And the original was still stuck. He was proven wrong however, as the clone suddenly raised its arm, and the red chakra cloak surrounding the arm focused into the nails. The arm grew longer and seemed to become like jello as it rolled backwards. The clone then smirked and slashed it down. The arm extending and slashing through all the tendrils and into the original. The Shukaku was shocked however, as the original erupted into smoke and disappeared from existence as the arm cut through all the tendrils. The clone, now freely falling through the air, promptly punched his arm forward, extending the red chakra-cloaked arm. The arm then gripped onto the Shukaku's body, and it seemed to reel in the clone's body closer to him. It was at this point the Shukaku finally understood what happened. And he growled in annoyance. Damn. Still as crafty as ever aren't you Kyuubi? It spat as looked down towards the Kyuubi's body still holding onto its body. He saw the Kyuubi smirk, which infuriated it even more. Tricks of the trade Shukaku. If you can't beat Down an opponent, you make yourself move well and attack smarter. The Kyuubi shouted as it launched itself from its grip. It used its arms still held on as a crutch as it shot forward. A slight vapor trail trailing behind him. The Shukaku was shocked at seeing the speed of the incoming body, and raised its arms to defend itself. But they were too slow. The Kyuubi shot past the arms coming at him from both sides, and past the Shukaku's shocked face. Which surprised the Shukaku even more, but it finally understood where he was going. The Kyuubi had found his opening. With the tendrils steadily reforming themselves, the defense would be slower. And that was all he needed to know. The Kyuubi inched closer to his target, still laying forward, no reaction and body still halfway buried in the Shukaku's forehead. The Kyuubi reared his hand backwards, preparing to punch the exposed body. Finally, after getting even closer, he shot his hand forward. The cloak extending and into a giant red fist. He was surprised however as the body hid behind a wall of sand almost instantly appearing in front of it. The fist shook the wall of sand, but didn't dent it. The Kyuubi was so surprised that he didn't notice the giant hand that was approaching him. The hand hit home and the Kyuubi was soaring through the air again, except this time towards the ground. He landed with a resounding crash, and dust sprang forth from the ground where he landed. He heard the Shukaku laughing maniacally behind the dust cloud. He pulled himself up, gripping his arm and panting heavily. As the dust cleared, he was met with another hand. This one sweeping across the ground, coming at him full speed. He was swept into the arm and he let out a groan of pain. The arm continued to sweep, blowing through countless buildings in its way. With the Kyuubi riding shotgun. As each building toppled to the ground, the pain the Kyuubi was experiencing was at a whole new level. Finally, after smashing through the last building and demolishing it, the arm abruptly stopped. The sudden stop sent all the force forward and into the Kyuubi's body, sending him into the air at breakneck speeds. He crashed through even more buildings, before he finally landed on a deserted street. Battered and bloodied, the Kyuubi groaned as it looked forward. To see a giant hole in the building he had went through, followed by other buildings behind that one with a similar hole in it. At the end of the tunnel of holes, the Kyuubi saw the Shukaku laughing as it eyed the battered form of the Kyuubi. And at that moment, the Kyuubi wanted nothing more than to see the Shukaku get pounded into the ground repeatedly. The Kyuubi pushed his body as he tried to stand. He managed for a few seconds, before he collapsed on one knee, his fists on the ground as he groaned from the pain. He tried to stand again, but again, he was forced to his knees. He growled in frustration. This wasn't funny. The Kyuubi reduced to sitting on its knees as the Shukaku laughed at his pitying form. This was a big blow to his pride. He tried one more time to stand up, but his injuries forced him to his knees once more. He let out a shout as he eyed the Shukaku's form, standing strong and laughing at him. He tried again, and it repeated. He was beaten, and he couldn't do anything about it. His injuries were too numerous, and even with his regenerative chakra, it would take a while to heal everything. And then, his vision started to get blurry. Black spots appearing, he let out another roar of frustration. His chakra began to recede, dissipating and fading away. The tails evaporated into nothing, and before long, the Kyuubi's vision finally left him. His body fell forward as the last bits of red chakra disappeared. The Kyuubi was defeated, and was out cold. XXX. Silence as both beings stared into each other. They eyed each other with an even look. One behind a giant cage, hiding its giant form from the other, smaller being. The smaller being had an apathetic look in his eyes as it stared down the giant demon. He was sitting in a pool of water, one knee bent into the other raised one. But surprisingly enough, he wasn't wet, even if half his body was in the water. The bigger being eyed the smaller one with an even glare. It held no malice, only frustration in its eyes as it eyed the small being. It was at this point, the smaller being sighed, getting the bigger being's attention as it narrowed his eyes. We can't beat this thing by ourselves, was what the smaller being stated. The bigger being didn't respond visibly, only eyeing the smaller being with curiosity. You know this as much as I do. And I hate it. That explanation you gave to that Anbu, about a biju only boosting the host's powers. I hate that fact. The smaller being said. The giant being didn't respond, only looking down with a curious expression on its face. You were using at least twice as much power as the Shukaku. The fact that it was big is irrelevant. The fact that you still lost, even after using twice as much power as it, gives me an idea of how strong I am. And how out of our league we are using my body. The smaller being stated. This time, the bigger being reacted, growling and narrowing its eyes at that fact. But the smaller being did not flinch. It continued on. I need to make up for it. The power boost I got from that match with Neji, it boosts my power alright. But I was still only on par with him. The being stopped, as if thinking of what else to say. Before it sighed. And you gave me a really powerful boost, but we still can't beat that thing. I have no idea how I used that power boost I got from the match. But I know how to at least use your chakra. The giant being now narrowed its eyes as it knew where this conversation was going. And it didn't like it at all. Hey Kyuubi, lend me your powers. I'll make sure to beat the hell out of the Shukaku. The being told the Kyuubi, who was looking at him with narrowed eyes. Silence ensued as the Kyuubi continued to stare at the small form of Naruto Uzumaki. The Kyuubi didn't respond in the least as Naruto just sat there with an empty expression on his face. After a while, the Kyuubi sighed. Small tendrils of chakra escaped the cage and went towards Naruto. Naruto didn't respond as the tendrils approached him, nor did he respond when the tendrils picked him up and drew him closer to the gate's seal paper. Finally, after the slow build-up, Naruto was in front of the sealing paper. The Kyuubi didn't say anything, as he waited for Naruto to do anything. Finally, after a few seconds of nothing, Naruto gripped the edge of the seal. But before he pulled it off, Naruto looked past the cage and grinned at the Kyuubi. I'm not ripping the whole thing off. Just so you know. Naruto told the Kyuubi with a smirk. The Kyuubi only huffed. I know you're not that stupid kid. Just promise me 2 things. The Kyuubi said as Naruto began pulling on the seal, tearing 1/4 of it. And those are. Naruto acts as he continued to tear the seal. First, is to beat the hell out of the Shukaku. The Kyuubi said, to which Naruto hummed in response. And the second, is to get stronger. The Kyuubi said with his voice dead serious. Naruto stopped pulling the seal, stopping an inch at the edge. The Kyuubi was surprised at Naruto's abrupt stop, before he was met with Naruto's smirking face looking at him from outside the cage. The first is easy to promise you. The second, however, I can't promise you. Naruto told the Kyuubi, who was visibly surprised at that. But before the Kyuubi could respond, Naruto continued. Only because I promised myself the exact same thing, you overgrown fuzzball. Naruto shouted as he pulled 1/4 of the seal off the cage. XXX. Jiraiya looked down glumly at the unconscious form of one Uzumaki Naruto. He saw the fight from the safety of distance. He saw how Naruto's Kyuubi-possessed body failed to use the Biju bomb ball thing, and how the Kyuubi dodged tendril after tendril of sand. He watched as the boy's body shot forward at high speeds towards the exposed body. Only to be stopped by a wall of sand moving faster than the fist. The fist connected with the sand wall, and didn't even leave a dent. He remembered wincing as Naruto's body was swatted to the ground. He remembered closing his eyes as the Shukaku swept the body through multiple buildings, before stopping abruptly and sending Naruto's body through even more buildings. It was at this point, after seeing the chakra cloak surrounding Naruto recede, that the Shukaku turned its back and resumed its previous rampage. Destroying even more buildings. Jiraiya would have gone after the Shukaku, but he was held back by Shima. Who told him to check on the youngin'. He ain't dead. He was apprehensive at first, but he receded to Shima's order. Shima nodded her head as she and Fukasaku went after the Shukaku. Hoping to draw the giant monster away one more time. Jiraiya sighed as he looked down one more time at the fallen form of Naruto. He moved to pick him up, but was shocked to suddenly feel a wave of power erupt from him. He jumped back, taking a defensive stance as he eyed the slowly rising form of Naruto. And before he knew it, Naruto's red cloak reappeared, both tails and all. Naruto slowly rose to the ground, rising by pushing his feet on the ground. He rose carefully and slowly, and the cloak reformed around him as he did. Jiraiya couldn't see his eyes, and carefully moved to the front of the body. He raised his hands as the body seemed to react to his movement. He was relieved, however, as the body looked up and was met with the soft eyes of Naruto Uzumaki, and not the hardened and angry eyes of the Kyuubi. Though it was still blood red and slitted, it wasn't like before, filled with anger and hate. Welcome back to the world of the living kid. What made you wake up? Jiraiya asks as he straightened himself. Naruto just smirked as he flicked his tails forwards in front of his face, carefully getting a feel of how they moved. He stretched and moved each limb, getting a feel for them as well. He smirked as he rolled his shoulders and heard it pop, removing the strain it had. Wasn't really asleep that long. I saw how the Kyuubi got his ass handed to him, and I decided to make a deal with, I am. He smirked, while Jiraiya nodded his head. Watch it, Kit. I can hear you. Naruto almost jumped as he heard the Kyuubi's voice sound in his mind. Jiraiya noticed his slight tensing and raised an eyebrow in confusion. Something wrong, kid? He had axe. Naruto didn't reply however as he just closed his eyes. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Does the Kyuubi having the ability to talk to you count as something wrong? Naruto asks, and Jiraiya was visibly shocked at that piece of information. What? How is that possible? Jiraiya asked with an incredulous expression. Naruto however, just shrugged and signaled for Jiraiya to stay quiet. You know what happened, don't you, fuzzball? Naruto asks, and he swore he heard the Kyuubi chuckle. You should know as well, boy. You're the one that made it possible. The Kyuubi stated, and Naruto thought about it for a second before he realized what happened. So I can talk to you now because I ripped a part of the seal off. He asks. However, he seemed to have spoken that thought out loud as well. As Jiraiya visibly shouted and reacted. You what? Jiraiya shouted in a panic. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? The Kyuubi could very well take over your body while you're asleep. Jiraiya berated. This however, fell on deaf ears as Naruto just smirked at Jiraiya. He won't, was his simple answer, and before Jiraiya could voice his question, Naruto had continued. He won't because we had a deal. I beat the crap out of the Shukaku, and he gives me his power. A good deal if you ask me. Naruto said with a smirk, his tail swishing behind him, prompting Jiraiya to look at them. Jiraiya sighed. This was just one big headache for him later. But first, he had another headache to take care of, and it was 50 feet tall and rampaging around the village. We'll deal with this later, kid. Right now, we have another problem to deal with. And it's 50 feet tall and out for blood. Jiraiya told Naruto, who nodded his head as his face turned deadly serious. Right now, I have a seal to take care of the Shukaku. Jiraiya explained as he jumped into the air and onto the building, Naruto following closely behind, listening carefully. But, to use the seal, we need to get to a weak point. Which happens to be that Gaara kid's body hanging on the Shukaku's forehead. Jiraiya continued as he jumped over more buildings. So far, Naruto hadn't uttered a word, and he was thankful for that. Problem is, anytime someone gets close, an automatic defense reacts almost immediately, stopping whatever kind of attack from hitting the kid. Now the defense can go either of two ways. The first, is the attack will get blocked by a wall of sand, and the Shukaku will use its arms to swat away the attacker. The other, the wall will rise, and as it catches the attack, it'll form another hand that will shoot out towards the attacker, sending them straight to the ground. Jiraiya explained, and Naruto nodded his head in understanding, letting out an audible sound of understanding. It doesn't matter how fast you go, the defense is almost always faster. So that leaves us only one choice. Jiraiya paused as he looked behind at Naruto, who was looking intently at Jiraiya with serious eyes. And that is to break through. XXX. Pa! Shima shouted as she watched her husband get hit with a tendril of sand. She was about to go check on him, but had to evade another tendril of sand coming at her. So far, their tactics of hitting and running were working, but the constant need of dodging the Shukaku's attacks was grating on their old bodies. They weren't as young, and they weren't as agile as before. Shima nimbly dodged another tendril, before she landed on the tendril and ran along its side. The tendril spun around the perimeter of the Shukaku, encircling it, before it rose straight up, surprising Shima at the sudden change of direction. She held onto the tendril, but her strength wasn't enough. She slipped and fell towards the ground. She looked behind her, and saw that multiple other tendrils approaching towards her back. She didn't panic however, as she just twisted her body and nimbly avoided two tendrils, before grabbing onto a third one and spun around it while going down. Multiple tendrils shot past her body as she spun towards the ground. And at the last second, she let go of the tendril and launched herself sidewards and over to a building. She landed on the building's side, only to have to dodge even more tendrils. She ran across the wall of the building, multiple tendrils piercing the wall she was running on, making holes appear on the building. At the edge of the building's wall, however, she jumped across to another building. That was her mistake, however, as the Shukaku's giant hand was waiting for her. She watched frozen in shock as the giant hand shot through the street between the buildings, coming at her at blinding speeds. She closed her eyes and waited for the impact. A loud boom erupted and wind swept past the buildings, blowing away portions of the closest buildings. Shima reopened her eyes, to be met with the backs of Naruto Uzumaki, and Jiraiya. Both had their arms on the arm and stopping it dead in its tracks. She landed on the ground, and looked in surprise as both shinobi roared and pushed the arm back with great strength. The Shukaku's arm reeled back from their strength, and the Shukaku itself looked down on towards the two shinobi. It had the eyes of someone looking for blood, and it wouldn't let anything get in its way. Shima was about to call out to them, before Fukasaku appeared in front of her, his cloak slightly tattered, but in otherwise still usable condition. So, this is Naruto-chan Ma's been singing praises about. Fukasaku acts as he eyed the form of the red chakra-cloaked Naruto. Naruto turned around and gave a thumb up at the old toad. Nice to meet Yagama Oji-san. Naruto said with a smile. Fukasaku didn't react, and only turned to Shima with a slightly questioning look that seemed to scream, really? Shima however just smirked and nodded her head. Yes really. Fukasaku sighed and shook his head, before he turned back towards both shinobi. He then jumped onto Jiraiya's shoulder. Shima followed closely as they all eyed the giant raccoon. The Shukaku let out a bellowing roar, which resounded across the village, a wave of wind flowing as it roared. This would have intimidated anyone facing this giant demon. But not these four, they only smirked as they readied themselves for the fight of a lifetime. But before they could take off towards the giant raccoon, however, Naruto had stopped them, eliciting confused looks from all three of his companions. We can't beat him like this, Naruto said. Jiraiya was surprised at his statement. I didn't expect that from you, kid. But let's go with that train of thought for now. What do you suppose we do? Jiraiya asks, carefully eyeing his temporary student with a critical eye. Shima and Fukasaku just looking on with confusion as to what the boy had planned. I suppose we do nothing, Naruto said with a big smile, eliciting a sigh from Jiraiya at how anticlimactic that was. Before he could voice out how that would beat the Shukaku, however, Naruto had continued talking. We don't fight him, but we let someone else fight him, Naruto shouted as he went on and did hand seals. Jiraiya was confused initially, before he recognized what technique Naruto was doing. He smirked and he jumped behind Naruto. Shima and Fukasaku knew what the kid was doing, and they smirked as well. After finishing the hand seals, Naruto bit his thumb for the second time that day, focusing all his chakra into the technique. Kuchio's no jutsu. Summoning jutsu. Naruto shouted with vigor. XXX. Meanwhile at Mount Myoboku, the toad leaders were running around in a panic. The toad sages suddenly disappeared a while ago, eliciting panic and surprise from the toad leaders. As most toad leaders were running around like a headless chicken, however, one toad smoking his pipe and sitting leisurely on the ground had finally had enough. Enough! The toad bellowed, garnering every other toad's attention. The toads stopped their panicking and looked at their leader with confused looks, and controlled panic. The boss toad took another whiff from his pipe, savoring the taste of the vegetation in it, before he let out a long sigh. Smoke coming out as he did. We'll accomplish nothing if we run around like headless chicken. Most likely, Jiraiya had needed their help for something and had summoned them for an impromptu trip to the human world. There's no need to panic for something as little as this. Those old toads can take care of themselves just fine. You lot, however, can't even last a day without your elders looking over your useless bodies. This is pathetic. The boss toad bellowed. The other toads that were previously in a panic had the decency to look abashed, before they all sat back down on the ground, visibly calmer and relaxed. It was at this point, the boss toad turned to his left and spoke to the closest toad next to him. Gamajin, tell me, how are your students doing? Is my son Gamakichi giving you any trouble whatsoever? The boss toad asks. The previously addressed toad, Gamajin, just sighed as he shook his head. His long red karate headband trailing behind his head. Thankfully no. He was a handful before, but after a fair bit of disciplining, he straightened up. In fact, Gamabunta, your son had the most potential to learn my technique. It is amazing to see him go through the katas, yet disappointing at the same time to see him slack off. Gamajin told Gamabunta. Gamabunta only sighed as he took another whiff of his pipe. He carefully eyed the martial arts toad master. He wasn't as big as him, but he was no small fry as well. He was about at least 3/3 his height and width. But his muscles were visibly more defined than his own. The hand-to-hand master was wearing a typical martial arts robe. Except this one was pure black and he had a dark red belt wrapped around the waist, complementing the toad's dark red skin. Gamabunta breathed out, smoke coming out of his mouth as he let out another sigh. I'm amazed he's still attending at all. Normally, this is the time he would have quit and continued looking to scam more toads for sweets. But I guess he holds the least bit of interest in learning how to fight. Gamabunta said, garnering a chuckle from the martial arts master. He takes that from his father. He chided, garnering an amused chuckle from Gamabunta. Gamabunta took another whiff of his pipe and eyed the other toads surrounding them. He sighed as he took the head count. They were complete, so it's about time to get this meeting started. Welcome back everyone. Time for your bi-weekly reports about whatever the hell your jobs are. Gamabunta said dismissively. Truth be told, he didn't like these meetings. They were a chore to go through, with him having to listen to each and every one of their reports. But being the toad chief that he was, it was to be expected from him. But before the first toad could speak up, they were hit with a sudden wave of malice-filled chakra. They all turned to where the wave originated, from Gamajin's place, and found the martial arts master breathing heavily and releasing wave after wave of red chakra. This was enough to raise everyone's guard as they all jumped away from the toad. Gamabunta, however, stayed where he was, though he had his sword drawn and was ready to bounce at a moment's notice. Gamajin, what's wrong? He all but spat at the toad. The toad, however, just raised his hand in a stop manner. Don't. I feel a sudden rise in my bloodlust, I have no idea what's happening. But don't get too close. I need to get this under control. Gamajin shouted. Gamabunta was apprehensive, before he nodded his head and jumped back towards the other toads, who all had their individual weapons drawn as well. They watched as Gamajin started to breath heavily. They watched as he out a bellowing roar, and they watched as he disappeared in a cloud of white smoke, confusing all of them as to what happened. Gamabunta frowned as he watched what happened. That didn't normally happen, and they hadn't seen anything like that happen. This was the first case of a berserk summoning. However, though he was frowning, he wasn't the least bit concerned about Gamajin. Out of all the toads, he had the most reins on his emotions. He would never go berserk unless you pushed him too far. And even then, he would still hold back. It just showed how disciplined toad martial arts master are. And Gamabunta was confident about Gamajin pulling through. He, however, had a whole lot of toads panicking again. And he sure as hell didn't have time for them to be panicking. XXX. White smoke erupted from the ground, covering a large part of the Naruto's side. Jiraiya and the two toad sages only watched in anticipation as to who Naruto summoned. They waited in bated breath as the cloud started to dissipate, showing the silhouette of a giant toad who seemed to be wearing a long headband on his forehead and was standing on its hind legs with its arms crossed. On top of the shadow, was Naruto's form, his cloak still surrounding him as he stood in a slightly leaning forward manner. As the smoke finally disappeared, Jiraiya and the two toad sages' eyes almost bugged out of their sockets. There, standing in front of the Shukaku was definitely a toad. But the slightly furred skin, the fox ears, and the red cloak surrounding it told them otherwise. The toad was as tall as Gamabunta, but it seemed to grow taller because it stood tall on its hind legs, towering over the Shukaku by a good 10 feet. The toad's furred arms were crossed over its open martial arts obi, showing off its slightly furred chest. Naruto was standing on top of its head, his red cloak of chakra almost invisible inside the giant toad's own red cloak of chakra. After a few seconds, the toad's closed eyes slowly opened, revealing them to be red and slitted just like Naruto's. Jiraiya was gaping like a fish, while Shima and Fukasaku were trying hard to rein in their own individual surprise. There, standing in all his transformed glory, was the one and only master of Mizukaki Ken no Sutairu, webbed fist style, imagine. XXX. Though he was initially surprised at seeing a whole new toad below him, Naruto managed to shake the feeling of surprise and replaced it with a confident smirk. Hey, big toad sensei. Naruto shouted from atop the toad's head. The toad looked up and looked at Naruto's small form. So, you are my summoner. Were you the one also responsible for my transformation? The toad asks. Naruto, however, just looked at him confused. Transformation? You mean you didn't look like this before I summoned you? He asks, genuine confusion in his voice. The toad nodded his head, before Naruto narrowed his eyes. Hey fuzzball. Does your chakra affect my summons too? Naruto asks inwardly. He heard the Kyuubi snort in exasperation. Of course it does, Kit. When you summon, you use the chakra currently in your body. And depending on whose is more dominant, yours or mine, the jutsu will react accordingly. When you summoned that boss toad Gamabunta, you were using more of your chakra than mine. And when you summoned that small old toad, you were using another form of chakra using nature. And when you summoned this toad, you were using my chakra. Hence the supposed transformation. The Kyuubi explained. Naruto only hummed in response as he turned back to the toad he was on. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Sorry if you don't like it. He apologized, garnering a small chuckle from the giant toad. Apologies are not needed, Rituru Gakusei. As long as it is not permanent, then we have no problems. The toad said. Naruto grinned as he looked forward at the standing Shukaku, and he was slightly surprised to find that he had to look down to see it. Name's Naruto Uzumaki. Will you lend me your hand? Naruto asks as he looked down at the Shukaku's aggressive form. He heard the toad chuckle. Of course, what kind of summon am I to deny my summoner? Get ready, Rituru Gakusei Naruto, this will be a fight for the history books. The toad said as he readied himself into a wide stance. The toad's knees were slightly bended outwards in opposite positions, giving the toad an awkward-looking leg stance. And while the legs were bended apart, his webbed right hand was raised just above the toad's right eye, while the left hand was sideways, and just below his jaw. All in all, he looked like a drunken man about to fight, but his stance seemed to radiate hidden power and finesse, which slightly unnerved Naruto. And before Naruto knew it, he and the toad were in front of the Shukaku, with the toad's left hand buried in the Shukaku's stomach. The Shukaku let out a howl of pain as the fist buried itself deeper in its stomach. And finally, at the apex of the punch, the force of the punch finally caught up, and launched the Shukaku into the air. The Shukaku shot backwards, barreling and skidding across the ground and toppling buildings in its wake. Finally, after demolishing countless buildings, he was stopped by the village's wall. With a resounding crash, the Shukaku crashed into the wall, giving it a rather large crater. Naruto watched all this happen from the top of the toad's head, and he whistled at the sight. Wow! That was amazing, Gamma-sensei. You just blew him away. That was awesome, Datbayo. Naruto shouted excitedly. The toad, however, just closed his eyes and let a small smirk appear on his face. Yes, it was. I am amazed myself at the force behind that punch. This transformation you gave me is quite useful. Though the increased bloodlust is irksome, I can manage to hold it down. But were it not for my training, I would have succumbed to the bloodlust sooner rather than later. The toad explained as he readied back into his stance. Oh, well, guess I'm just lucky, huh? But please, Gamma-sensei. Can you keep the damage to a minimum? This village is my home, and I don't want it destroyed by me defending it. Naruto asks, to which the toad only nodded. Naruto smirked at the answer. He stood up straight on the toad's head, ready to start the fight and get the seal onto Gaara's body. Before he seemed to remember something. Hey, I didn't catch your name, Gamma-sensei. Can I ask what it is? Naruto asks as he looked down on the toad, who only allowed a small smile to appear on his face. My name is of no importance, however, if you so desire to know my name, I will gladly tell you, so long as you prove yourself in this fight. Prove to me that you are indeed worthy of being my summoner, Naruto Uzumaki, and I will gladly answer. Were the toad's words. Naruto smirked at that. He faced forward again, to the steadily recovering Shukaku. And his smirk grew wider. Then let's get wild. Chapter 6. These puppets of yours, they're better than I give them credit for. Hiruzen quipped as he dodged a sword strike coming from Orochimaru. But as he dodged to the left, Rolling along the ground, he was met face to face with the first Hokage's fist impacting on his stomach. With a loud grunt, he was propelled backwards, hitting the wall divider with a loud thump. He then heard Orochimaru's condescending laughter as he looked up and towards his previous student. Kukuku, don't misunderstand sensei. They may be puppets, but they are the originals. I wouldn't underestimate them again if I were you. Orochimaru laughed. Hiruzen spit out blood, and steadily used his staff to stand. Hiruzen, try to get close and engage the first in a grappling match. I have an idea. Enma whispered. Hiruzen didn't indicate he heard anything, and just proceeded to run straight towards his two opponents. With a loud battle cry, he swung his staff like a baseball bat. Orochimaru didn't move from where he was, and just looked on amused. Suddenly, the first Hokage was in front of Orochimaru, his hand raised and prepared to block the staff. With a powerful shockwave, the staff connected with the first's open hand. Dust bellowing at the force behind the attack. The first Hokage didn't even flinch, as he just looked on impassively, Hiruzen's staff still gripped in his hand. Is that it, sensei? Pure brute force. You have grown senile. Orochimaru taunted as he looked at the scene. He was about to goad Hiruzen further, but the sudden burst of smoke from Hiruzen's staff silenced him. Gotcha! Enma shouted as he appeared from the smoke and gripped the first's arm with his hands and tail. The first didn't react, only looking on impassively at what was happening. Now Hiruzen! Enma shouted as he pulled hard and flipped the Hokage over his shoulders. Before the first could react fast enough, Hiruzen was upon him. Hiruzen shot a punch forward that hit the first Hokage's backside, bending it in a very uncomfortable manner. But he didn't let up, as he kicked low towards the first's still falling body. The kick landed on the first's head, snapping it towards the right. Finally the first landed on the ground. Dust sprang forth from his landing space, and clouded Orochimaru's vision. As the dust cleared, Orochimaru clicked his teeth at what he saw. The first Hokage's head was halfway buried into the sand, his body bent awkwardly. He watched as the first Hokage's body start to disintegrate into the body of the sound team he had used to fight Sasuke Uchiha. He didn't know which of the three, and now, for you. Orochimaru's attention returned to Hiruzen, who had suddenly charged at him, fist raised and ready to deliver a powerful haymaker to his face. Hiruzen shot his fist forward, but Orochimaru managed to dodge at the last second, moving his head slightly to the right as the fist passed by his ear. He couldn't react to the other punch that was the follow-up, however. He was launched back, by another white monkey fist had connected whereas Hiruzen couldn't. He flipped in the air and landed on his feet, skidding on the ground as the force was enough to still propel him backwards. He clicked his teeth in frustration as he tasted iron. That punch was strong, but he had faced harder from someone else. But still, it was enough to draw blood and slightly dislocate his jaw. Orochimaru gripped his lower jaw and, with a loud pop, he pushed it back in place. He opened his mouth and moved his lower jaw, just to test if it was still usable. Satisfied that it was still usable and wasn't mush, he glared at Hiruzen and readied himself for a close-up fight. He wasn't stupid enough to have his previous sensei have the advantage of long range, he knew too many techniques for that to be viable. Orochimaru steadied himself. While Hiruzen, having Enma back in his staff form, had taken a defensive position seeing Orochimaru ready himself. After a few more seconds of staring at each other, Orochimaru sprang into action. He kicked his leg on the ground and launched at Hiruzen, sword poised to pierce. Hiruzen saw the attack coming and sidestepped to the left. He watched as Orochimaru flew past him. But he didn't get any more than that. As snakes suddenly grappled him and constricted themselves on his arms and legs. Orochimaru, who had landed just past Hiruzen, let out a laugh at hearing his sensei's surprise. Kukuku. Remember sensei, look underneath the underneath. You were the one to teach me that. I'm rather disappointed that you don't take your own advice. Orochimaru said condescendingly. Hiruzen dropped Enma as a snake bit into his left arm and left leg. And suddenly, his arm and leg were numb. He glared at Orochimaru, wincing as he felt the effects of poison enter his system. You didn't see the snakes I had positioned right behind me. Oh dear sensei. You need glasses. Kukuku. And don't worry about those snakes. Their venom won't kill you, only paralyze you. Orochimaru explained, his voice containing a hidden glee. He approached Hiruzen, who, at this point, was trying his hardest to regain control of his body. However, their venom is something special. Though you're paralyzed from head to toe, Orochimaru shot his sword forward, wounding Hiruzen on his right cheek. He would have winced and let out a pained shout. But his body wasn't responding. You still feel pain. Pity you can't scream. But beggars can't be choosers, or so the saying goes. Orochimaru said. Hiruzen struggled against the snakes constricting him, and the venom paralyzing him. Oh well, pity you had to die so anticlimactically, sensei. Orochimaru said as he raised his sword, ready to behead the paralyzed Hokage. Such a sad end to a powerful shinobi. Orochimaru slashed down. But before the sword could cut through Hiruzen's neck, a loud clang, followed with the sound of the air being cut by shuriken made Orochimaru jumped back in alarm. Orochimaru couldn't help but hiss in annoyance. He had failed to notice the barrier had been broken, and that several leaf shinobi had invaded the battlefield. He cursed those 4 incompetent fools. All they had to do was keep their hands on the barrier. And they failed at even that. Give it up, Orochimaru, you're surrounded, the sand and sound forces have been defeated, you're all alone now. The voice of his previous accursed teammate rang from behind him. And he couldn't help but smirk. Oh. And why, pray tell, do you think I'll just surrender? I've come too far to just up and leave Jiraiya. He said as calmly as he could muster. He heard Jiraiya snort from behind him. Yeah, you've come far. From my teammate, to my best friend, to my mortal enemy. Just give up, Orochimaru. Soon as Jinchuriki is out like a light, all your forces are on full-on retreat mode. The only ones here are you, your 4 lapdogs, and several prisoners. Jiraiya calmly stated. Orochimaru had had enough and turned around and faced his teammate. He scowled at the sight of the man, from his red vest, to his olive undershirt. His white hair and his wooden clogs. He even loathed the 2 elder toads on his shoulders. He loathed this man. And yet, he wasn't what caught his attention. Behind the man, cuffed by several Anbu, clothes torn and tattered. Sun-kissed blonde hair waving in the air, was Naruto Uzumaki. However, that wasn't the only thing he noticed, he also noticed the scowling face of Danzo in the sea of faces surrounding him. This wasn't a cause for his attention, but the mere fact that Danzo was missing his right arm, with several wounds around his body was the cue that Orochimaru needed. He may have failed at killing his sensei, but he had a nice consolation prize. And the destruction of the village was a nice bonus as well. Orochimaru let out a low chuckle as he looked around his person. Carefully taking note of the several angry faces around the crowd, the several impassive ones as well. It seems that my invasion has done more things for this village than I would have imagined. Orochimaru goaded, which prompted some shinobi to scowl and take up arms, ready to attack the Sannin. Orochimaru let out a low laugh as he looked around, looking between all the scowling faces. Before he sent his look towards one person, this one shackled by Anbu. And I have you to thank for that, Naruto-kun. Without you, my invasion would never have been as destruction-filled as I'd have ever hoped. Orochimaru cackled as Naruto looked down, regret obvious in his face. The shinobi around Orochimaru spared a glance at the young boy, some had looks of disgust, distrust, and anger. While some had looks of pity, sadness, and impassiveness. I have to ask though, Orochimaru continued as he looked at Jiraiya. How did you manage to break the barrier? Jiraiya just smirked at his teammate, before showing him a seal he always kept on himself. Surplus of negation seals. You're good at seal making, Orochimaru, I'll give you that. But all your seals have one weak spot. It requires a certain person to control the sealed object. Jiraiya explained. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow at his explanation. I didn't ask about seals, I asked about the barrier. Orochimaru said. While Jiraiya just chuckled. 4 corners. Your barrier needs seals on 4 corners. And each corner had one person on it. Easy enough to take out someone who had their hands on the ground. Just my luck as well, I had a red head. Potty mouth that one, but still. Jiraiya trailed. Orochimaru just chuckled. Ah yes. Tayuya has a rather uncouth personality. Orochimaru said. Jiraiya ended the banter right then and there as he looked at him, all business. Now, are you coming with us? Or do I have to take you by force? Jiraiya asked with a war veteran's voice. Orochimaru chuckled as he held out his hands. I surrender. XXX. Several minutes before. Jump. Naruto warned as he saw streams of sand erupt from the ground and start circling Gamajin. Got it. Gamajin reacted quickly, barely dodging the sand as it enclosed into a stalactite that would have otherwise killed both of them via crushing. As Gamajin stayed airborne, he was suddenly assaulted by multiple sand shuriken that was coming at him at blinding speeds. He twisted his body in time as two sand shuriken sailed past his body, one missing his head by a few inches. But the third shuriken was coming at him dead on, and with no room to dodge or at least move, he raised his arms in front of him to try and catch the shuriken. But this wasn't needed, as the giant sand shuriken was blindsided by Jiraiya with a Rasengan, veering it off course and high into the air. Gamajin landed on his feet, as Jiraiya landed on a nearby rooftop. They all stared at the Shukaku, who was steadily laughing louder and louder. Naruto stared at the giant raccoon, and looked down at Jiraiya, as if he had a brilliant idea. Naruto's ideas work, both they are far from brilliant. Hey Arrow Sennin! Naruto shouted from atop Gamajin's head. Jiraiya looked up, as well as Fukasaku and Shima, all wondering what Naruto had to say. I got an idea. Naruto shouted, making Jiraiya and both elders raise an eyebrow. Before Jiraiya could ask what his idea was, Naruto leaned down and whispered something to Gamajin, who looked up at his summoner with an incredulous look. Are you sure about this? Gamajin asks, his fox-like ears twitching in anticipation for Naruto's answer. Naruto only nodded and grinned at the faux fox toad. Very well. Gamajin nodded his head in an affirmative. And, for the umpteenth time that day, Jiraiya was shocked at what Naruto had thought of. Gamajin raised his hands to his head, and promptly gripped Naruto in his right hand, before he leaned down and grabbed Jiraiya into his right. Surprising the Toad Sannin and the elder toads. Fukasaku-sama, Shima-sama, I ask you to leave Jiraiya-sama's shoulders. Gamajin calmly requested the elder toads to remove themselves from the Toad Sannin. They both numbly nodded, not really sure what was happening. But all the confusion was turned into shock at what happened after they left Jiraiya's shoulders. Faster than Jiraiya could react, Gamajin pulled both his arms holding both humans into his hands behind him. And, after a few seconds of silence, Gamajin promptly chucked both humans like darts straight towards the laughing Shukaku. Are you CRAAAAZZYYYYYY? Jiraiya's voice echoed as he left the three toads behind. Naruto just laughing at how fast they were going. As the toads watched both humans head straight towards the Shukaku. Gamajin suddenly keeled over, clutching his stomach in pain. Fukasaku and Shima jumped in alarm at the sudden movement, but their surprise was replaced with shock as they watched the fox toad revert back into a regular toad. His ears receded, leaving nothing but thin air where it once was. The tail too was gone. The red cloak of chakra was dissipating into smaller clumps that was washed away in the wind. Gamajin let out a gasp as the transformation finally ended, his heavy breathing worrying both elder toads. But as he straightened his body, he let out a deep breath to steady his heartbeat. It seems that the transformation only works if Naruto is connected with the toad. Gamajin stated, which earned him a nod from Fukasaku. You're right, but we'll talk about that later. Right now, what exactly does Naruto-chan have in mind? Shima asks, while Gamajin just smirked mysteriously. It is either the smartest plan that will give us the win, Gamajin stated, as he readied himself to re-engage the Shukaku. He bent his legs low towards the ground, kicking up small hills of dirt behind his feet. Fukasaku noticed this and signaled for Shima to jump on Gamajin. Both elders did so, landing on top of his head. Gamajin trailed as he steadied himself. It is the stupidest, most convoluted plan anyone has ever thought of. Gamajin finished as he kicked his legs, launching towards the Shukaku at breakneck pace, velocity rings forming around him as he cut through the air. The glass around the buildings he was passing vibrated as he passed, shattering them as he went past them. Not too long after he launched, he had caught up to the still airborne Naruto and Jiraiya, and passed them. He was steadily closing onto the Shukaku, and he raised his fist to strike. The fist landed, but not on the Shukaku. It landed on the Shukaku's shield defense, stopping the punch with a loud thud. The force of the blow rattling the nearby buildings and causing a mini quake around the perimeter of both giant beings. Gamajin reeled his fist back in pain, but he didn't let up on the offensive as he swiped low with his leg. sweeping the ground in the hope of taking the shukaku off its feet. But the two was blocked, and as the foot landed on the wall of sand, it was steadily enveloped by it. Gamajan looked on in alarm as he struggled to get his foot free, and as he looked up at the shukaku's smiling face, he knew he was in trouble. Thankfully, the two elders' toads reacted fast enough. Fukasaku launched a ball of water at the sand wrapped around Gamajan's foot, while Shima blew out wind that struck the sand. The combined force of the water balls and wind blew the sand away from the foot, giving Gamajan ample time to yank his foot away from the wet sand. The shukaku looked annoyed at what happened, but as it prepared to counter with its own offensive, its attention suddenly shifted straight forward as he heard shouting. Jiraiya had his arm forward, Rasengan spiraling around in his arms, ready to take a big chunk away from the shukaku. The shukaku raised his arm in defense, his wall surrounding his arm for extra protection, but as the sand wall rose, he failed to notice another being enclosing into his position, which was carefully positioned so he was blocked by the Sanin's body. The being landed on the shukaku's sand-reinforced arm, hand raised with several paper bombs in a ball. The being buried the ball deep into the wall. The being jumped away from the wall just in time as the ball exploded, imploding the sand wall into itself and crystallizing it from the inside out from the heat. The shukaku looked on in shock as its wall crumbled into crystal glass. But his attention returned to the Sanin, who was dangerously close. In a fit of desperation, Shukaku raised its arm and readied himself to crash down onto the Sanin. But to his surprise, the arm was held back by the two elder toads' tongues, both wrapped around the forearm and holding it back from crashing down. The Shukaku was out of options now, and it opted to just close its eyes and wait for the incoming strike. But again, to his surprise, the strike never came. What he felt, however, was something landing on its nose. The Shukaku opened his eyes, only to stare into the eyes of the Sanin, who had a deathly smirk on his face. I was right. That student of mine is crazy, Jiraiya said as he looked down into the eyes of the Shukaku. Shukaku narrowed his eyes at what he just said. But before it could react to Jiraiya's statement, a shadow passed by its peripheral vision. He looked up, snapping its head straight up to look at what that shadow was. Jiraiya managed to hold on, but the smirk on his face didn't let up as he watched the Shukaku's face twist in shocking realization. There, next to the body of his jailer, next to Gaara's body, was a grinning Naruto Uzumaki, a piece of paper in his right hand flapping in the wind. I don't believe it, you sucka, Naruto shouted as he slammed the seal onto the back of Gaara. The Shukaku let out an angered howl as it felt his body start deteriorating, its giant sand body falling onto the destroyed streets of Konoha. Chunk by chunk, steadily but surely, it was being sealed back into Gaara. Gra! The Shukaku roared once more as its body finally fell apart, leaving only the head that was slowly falling. The last bits of the Shukaku finally disappeared as the head of sand landed on the ground with a loud thud. Gamajan and the elders watched the scene unfold a few meters away, and they couldn't help but smile at what happened. The biggest gambit. A double distraction. Hiding behind Jiraiya-chan's figure as they sailed towards the Shukaku couldn't defend against the paper ball bomb. Fukasaku said as he watched the head crumble on the ground. And, as the Shukaku was distracted by Jiraiya-chan's attack, Naruto-chan used the explosion's shockwave to propel himself high into the air. Shima continued as she smiled at the ingenuity of the plan. But, that was all a distraction. Jiraiya was never the threat, it was Naruto. Gamajan finished with a smirk. His black obi now openly flapping in the wind. He let out a deep breath, and looked upon the body of Naruto Uzumaki, who was dusting himself from the sand. Truly an amazing summoner. I look forward to working with him in the near future. Gamajan lamented as he let a small smile appear on his lips. He then promptly dispelled himself, leaving behind a great wall of white smoke. XXX. Woo! Naruto shouted as he jumped into the air, fist pumping as excitement coursed through his veins. The sand all but forgotten as he jumped up and down repeatedly, much like he did during his match with Neji. But he was taken out of his musings by the sound of the wind being cut. He turned his head just in time, as two shuriken the back of his head, cutting pieces of his hair by their close proximity. He looked up and narrowed his eyes as he saw two shinobi with purplish-gray uniforms and masks standing on a nearby mountain of rubble. He watched as both shinobi take out more shuriken from their pouches, and prepared to launch them at him. But to his and the enemy shinobi's surprise, the two enemy shinobi were suddenly blindsided by a red blur. The two shinobis' heads collided with each other, sending each other up in the air. Naruto watched as both shinobi land somewhere in the horizon. He returned his gaze to where the two shinobi were previously standing on. There, he saw his new sensei standing with a slight smirk on his face. "Don't celebrate yet, kid. We're being invaded right now," Jiraiya told Naruto, who only looked at him with wide eyes. "Wait, what?" Naruto shouted incredulously. Jiraiya just chuckled at his reaction. "Long story short, kid, Suna and Oto teamed up to take us down. I have information that Oto is behind this alliance, but nothing solid," Jiraiya explained as he jumped down towards Naruto. But his smirking face scowled as he looked behind Naruto, and saw the steadily standing form of Gaara. Naruto noticed his face scowl, and turned around and looked at Gaara, who had his body leaning forward, his hair covering his face. Naruto noticed the sand start to gather around Gaara, before they launched at Naruto. But he just sidestepped. It was slow. So painfully slow. Slower than a shuriken being thrown. Naruto dodged another wave of sand coming at him, and he started to walk forward. Towards the body of Gaara, who was shaking, whether this is with anger or fear. He didn't know. Each step he took echoed through the fallen buildings. The distant sound of fighting was inaudible as he put one foot forward, carefully closing in on Gaara. As he dodged another wave of sand, he heard the air being cut by a projectile. He jumped in time as kunai landed on the ground where he once was. He looked around and tried to find the source of the attack. And to his surprise, two figures materialized around Gaara. One had her arms around the red-haired boy, while one was standing in front of Gaara in a fighting stance. He heard sobbing, and he looked up and behind the boy protectively in front of Gaara. He couldn't hear what was being said, he could only hear the sobs in between words. But to his surprise, tendrils of sand slowly gripped the protective boy's legs, as well as the girl's. The slow gait of the sand crawling up their legs surprised the two figures. The protective figure turned around with wide eyes as he looked at Gaara. What the hell, Gaara? The boy shouted, sweat falling down his chin and making his kabuki makeup run. But he didn't care about that, he was more scared for his life. Gaara, please, stop this. It's over. The girl shouted in desperation as she clutched onto Gaara, who didn't at all react to her scared voice. Do not stop me. I will not have my existence erased. Gaara shouted as the sand started to pick up the face, now halfway up both boy and girl's bodies. The girl sobbed again, and she hugged the young boy. Even tighter. But the sand didn't let up, as more of her body was being engulfed by the sand. The boy with the kabuki face just sighed, before he turned around and looked at Naruto, who was looking at the scene with a somber face. Hey kid, Naruto looked up at the boy's own somber face. Whatever happens, just don't let Gaara die. Please. He's our brother. The boy said. Naruto nodded his head. I promise. The boy let out a small snort-like chuckle. Hey, I'll hold you to that. The name's Kankuro. My sister's called Temari. And our brother over here. Kankuro trailed as he leaned his body to the side, so Naruto could see Gaara's body. Kankuro pat Gaara's head, his hand staying on top of Gaara's red hair. He's called Gaara. You're the same as him. At least, that's what I'm guessing. Your fight with him was something else. Kankuro chuckled, but his voice was strained, as the sand reached his shoulders now. Temari looked up, and glanced at Naruto. You're different though, aren't you? You aren't like him. Temari asked with tears in her eyes. Naruto let out a small chuckle. Yeah. I ain't like him, he trailed with a ghost of a smile on his face. He's better than me. The sand abruptly stopped as it was about to cover both shinobi's faces. Gaara's body shook, garnering the shinobi's attentions. Gaara muttered something under his breath, Naruto didn't hear it. So he leaned forward and cupped his ear. What was that? He asked as he leaned forward. To his surprise, the sand covering both sand shinobi's bodies began to fall to the ground. Temari and Kankuro looked at Gaara in shock, surprised he had suddenly done that. I'm not. Gaara's raspy voice echoed through the air with the faint sound of battle in the horizon. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his words. While Temari and Kankuro just looked on at Gaara. Confusion evident in their faces. What? Naruto acts. Gaara just growled. I'm not better than you. Gaara shouted furiously. Naruto took a step back in surprise. Not really expecting that kind of outburst. I'm a monster. I killed my mother, killed the closest thing to a mother I had. I killed countless people that tried to assassinate me, ordered by my father. I'm not better than you. I'm a monster. Gaara shouted as the sand around his feet stiffened once more. Naruto readied himself to dodge once more, expecting the sand to start flying again. But again, he was surprised as Temari and Kankuro stood in front of Gaara, the former hugging the red-haired boy, while the latter had his arms wide open. Just stop, Gaara. Temari shouted as she hugged the red-haired boy. Gaara didn't hear it, as the sand suddenly shot past Temari and Kankuro, heading straight towards Naruto. Naruto grit his teeth as he jumped to the left, narrowly dodging the sand. This is why you're better than me. Naruto shouted as he landed on the ground, but Gaara didn't let up, as he had to dodge another wave of sand coming from his right. He rolled forward, feeling the sand brush past his back. I don't get it. Gaara shouted as he redoubled his efforts to hit Naruto. Not bothering to move Temari and Kankuro from his field of vision. He only had one target. And that target was wearing orange. I'm not better than you. You have teammates that care about you. You have people that cheer for you. These people want you to win, to survive. I'm a monster. No one wants to see me alive. Gaara shouted agony, letting loose everything he had bottled up inside. Naruto had heard enough. Shut up. He shouted with as much passion as he could muster. The approaching sand suddenly halted, right in front of Naruto's face. And to Naruto's credit, he didn't even flinch. Stop telling me your sob story. Everyone has one. Naruto shouted as he brushed past the sand tendril, walking past it with a scowl on his face. Each step he took seemed to echo throughout the immediate vicinity. Like he was a man with a mission that he was determined to see to the end. And that scared Gaara. No. Stay away from me. Gaara shouted frantically as more sand tendrils appeared and flew forward towards Naruto's approaching form. But Naruto just sidestepped the slow tendrils. Gaara. Stop. You're weak. We have to leave. Temari shouted, almost hysterical at seeing her younger brother in fear. Stay away. Stay away from me. Gaara shouted again and again, wanting Naruto to just disappear from his sight. Naruto was having none of it as he just continued moving forward. With each tendril he sidestepped. Gaara's voice grew more hysterical. But his tendrils slowed as he continued. Naruto knew he was on his last legs, and so did Gaara's siblings. As he sidestepped one last tendril, he stared down on the terrified face of Gaara. He didn't even register the determined faces of Temari and Kankuro. But before either two could do anything, Naruto beat them to it by a head. Literally. With a loud thud, Naruto's forehead crashed on Gaara's, stunning the red-haired boy. And shocking the spectators. Blood dripped down on their foreheads. Naruto didn't care. Gaara needed to hear what he was going to say. You're an even bigger idiot than I am. What gives you the right to ignore your brother and sister's feelings, you asshole? Naruto shouted, his voice full of anger. Not stopping for a second. Naruto removed his forehead from Gaara's. And promptly repeated, banging his head on Gaara's again. You may have assassins on you, but every day. You may have killed your mother, you may have an even bigger reason to hate everyone than I do. Naruto ranted as blood dripped from his forehead. But don't you forget. Naruto shouted as he removed his forehead once again from Gaara's. And repeated the process of crashing both their foreheads together. Don't you ever forget. You have a family. You have a brother and sister that care for you. And heck, you even have a father. Get that through your thick skull, you red-haired bastard. Naruto shouted with all his leftover vigor. Gaara's face began contorting, first from anger. Then to pain. Before it finally settled to a pained expression. Naruto looked Gaara in the eyes. And in them, Gaara finally saw why Naruto wanted him to understand. He wasn't the only one in pain. Everyone hurts as well. Tears formed in Gaara's eyes. And before long, he had streams of tears cascading down from his eyes. XXX. Jiraiya patiently watched the scene unfold in front of him. Was this appropriate at the time? Heck no. There was an invasion going on. But was it what the kid needed? Of course it was. He was silently thanking Kami that no one dared attack them while this was going on. as the fighting seemed to have moved to another part of the village. He let out a sigh as an explosion rocked the general vicinity, surprising the four kids as they steadied their bodies. "Hey kid," Jiraiya called out to Naruto, who looked at him with confusion. "We need to hurry this up, kid, people still need backup. Make a shadow clone and just escort those three to the precinct. The desk jockeys there will know what to do." Sure, that sounded callous and cold. But death was evident around him now. The world wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. He watched as Naruto looked behind him, his face contorting from confusion, shock, and sadness. Naruto looked back towards Jiraiya, and he knew what Naruto was going to ask. It was evident on his face. "Can't we?" "No." Jiraiya cut him off before he could finish the sentence. Naruto recoiled, flabbergasted at the cold tone Jiraiya was using. After all, he hadn't seen this side of the goofy Sannin before. "Listen kid. This world isn't a make nice with each other world. We are trained soldiers. We are supposed to remove our humanity and just continue on without them," Jiraiya stated coldly. Jiraiya observed as Naruto looked down and clenched his hands, curling them into tight fists. Jiraiya sighed. "But listen kid," Jiraiya continued, garnering Naruto's attention. "The good shinobi will kill without his humanity and will never have his humanity ever again." Jiraiya explained. "But to be truly great, a shinobi knows when to switch his humanity on and off. When to kill, and when to spare a life. Right now, not capturing them would make you a good shinobi. Because if we don't take them, someone else will kill them. We're in a battlefield kid," Jiraiya stated matter-of-factly. "So just follow whatever I have to say, and before long, you'll be great like me. Heck, you're showing greatness right now." Jiraiya grinned cheekily at Naruto, trying to encourage the young boy. Naruto still had his eyes closed, but his fists had uncurled into open palms. Jiraiya watched as he sighed. Before he formed a cross-hand seal. XXX. "Damn it. Everyone fall back," Fujikima ordered his men. It was a cowardly move, but they didn't have a choice. They didn't have enough men to push back the advancing waves of sound shinobi coming at them from the front. So the best move was to fall back and regroup. There was no way they were going to repel these men with the way they were shorthanded. He turned around once he was sure that all his men had fallen behind him. But to his surprise, his men had remained stationary, almost glued to the ground staring at the buildings. "What's wrong with you? I ordered you all to retreat. Don't you?" Fujikima never got to finish his sentence as his head was severed from his body by a giant shuriken coated in wind chakra. And before long, all the other men fell with him, blood splattering from their bodies as they all fell one by one. Several seconds after the last leaf shinobi fell, Sand shinobi landed on the ground, breathing heavily and looking a little ragged. They were soon met up with the other force of shinobis, namely the sound force. "Hey, we got them good. They didn't expect a two-pronged attack," the sound captain said rather smugly as he watched his men and the sand shinobi dispatch any other stragglers. "Yeah, you could say that again. But man, they had more men in the village than I thought. We had to fight through 3 other teams of leaf shinobis," the sand captain managed to say through ragged breaths. "Yeah, well, looks like we finished up this general area anyway. There won't be any other leaf shinobis here seeing as we had already met up. So just relax for now. We'll get new orders as soon as the last stragglers fall," the sound captain told the sand captain, who let out a deep breath of appreciation. But, unbeknownst to them, they were being stalked by a fearsome man. A legend in his own right. The great toad sage of Konoha. And self-proclaimed, super pervert. With a swift gust of wind, the entire area suddenly smelled like rotten eggs. Phew. What is da? With a loud boom, the entire area erupted into flames, leveling the general vicinity. Too extravagant. Yes. Necessary. Of course. They had wiped the area clean of any leaf civilian and shinobi. There was nothing else there but enemies that needed to be killed. Kaiten. Jigoku no Kusata Bakuhatsu, fire release, Hell's rotten explosion. XXX. For the next several minutes, these field-leveling explosions rocketed the village, effectively stopping the advance of enemy sound shinobi. Fearing for their lives as each explosion shook the very ground they were running on. Finally, after a final explosion, everything went silent, surprising the majority of shinobi. as this was uncommon, even in wartime. Normally, a sudden silence meant a loud explosion suddenly shook the area. This one, astronomically bigger than the previous ones. The explosion threw the sand and sound shinobi. And they all immediately turned tail and ran, fearing the worst if they stayed there. And as the fleeing invaders left the general vicinity, the leaf shinobi couldn't tear their eyes from the damage that not only the explosions caused, but also the general fighting by the invaders. Never in all their lives did they imagine this kind of damage would happen to this mighty village. And for once in the lives of this generation of leaf shinobis, they questioned the strength of each other. Buildings were crumbling, streets were destroyed, trees uprooted, entire city blocks leveled. The damage was unbelievable. But as they took in the damage, they noticed something was weird with one general area. Namely, the area where two Biju fought all out. Quite frankly, the damage done by the invaders was palpable to the damage done by the two Biju fighting. There was only where the buildings once stood. And the area was leveled to flat ground. Like the bottom of a fishbowl filled with sand. It was flat, and oh so empty. As the leaf shinobi took in the damage, they failed to notice one man who had caused all of the explosions just a few minutes ago. Listen here, you shinobi. All the leaf shinobi turned to the one man, one white-haired legend who had addressed them all. The damage has been done. And now is not the time for looking it over. The enemy has been routed. But that does not mean there are no more enemies lurking around. The legend of a man shouted, trying to gather everyone's attention as to how bad the situation still is. But while most of the leaf shinobi's attention were on the legendary Sanin, some noticed the small figure right beside him. The one wearing nothing but his orange jacket with no undershirt along with orange pants that were tattered. But before some shinobi could call him out, the Sanin spoke up once more. Right now, we need to find our leader and rally under him. There would be no sense in retaliating against our attackers. We are weak enough as it is. Right now, we need leadership. We need someone to rally under. Someone to lead us. The Sanin's voice reverberated through the ranks, giving them confidence on what to do next. We find our leader. That is the best way to move forward from this. The Sanin paused, as if contemplating what to say next. He looked to his left, and stared at the orange-clad boy looking on the ground in shame. The Sanin took a deep breath. Before he ordered one last thing. If we find any stragglers, there will be no prisoners. Was the last thing he said before he took the boy and disappeared in a cloud of white smoke.
Thanks guys for watching. This is the end of this part. Remember to subscribe, like, comment and turn on that bell notification. This is Milton_Fanfiction and I'll see you guys on the next video.